Okay. So we've got Dale Fitch. I'm going to do introductions for y'all. Actually, no, scratch that. Dale, go ahead and introduce yourself. A sense of, 2 sentences, your experience and how you got involved in the project. Oh, you're mute. You're on mute.
Okay, there we go. 2 sentences, yeah.
Well, what's your experience in the field? Yeah, go ahead.
Right. So starting as a social worker back in the 80s, always using the United Way Blue Book to make referrals to agencies, and then starting in the aughts, working with a local implementation of 211, and then primarily focusing around the information system issues. That's it.
And how did you get involved in this initiative?
Somehow or other you found me. I don't know how that happened.
That may actually be, I realize now that may actually be the answer that everybody gets. That may not be a helpful question.
It's not. I got an email from you one day. Okay, my question, how did you find me? And that's the answer.
That's
there
right.
You go.
I found Dale, a man named Matt Hampel, who developed a local data project in Detroit. I was talking to him about this little problem at the organization I was working for, and he was like, "That's a problem that Dale Fitch would know how to talk to you about," and it was true. Dale was the first subject matter specialist who I interviewed about this issue.
And now we know why you've been off track from the beginning. So.
All right, Derek.
Derek Corson. I did some INR work 20 years ago. Since then, I've been doing a lot of data modeling and information systems design from about the human services from a bunch of different points of view. So just interested in how this thing can fit into the bigger whole.
And I found Derek. I think somebody sent me a blog post that he'd written, and I got on in an email thread discussion with him, and it was the first time that I'd ever been in an organizing conversation where my homework was to read Borges. That was the outcome. That was the next step, read Borges. All right, Eric.
Eric Yan. I work for Alexandria Consulting. Got into the INR field indirectly through the homeless management information system. I started it with EOL projects and then got into HUD projects, which the HMIS, Homeless Management Information System, is a part of. And most HMISs need a resource database, so and a lot of the vendors are the same between the AIRS and the HMIS field and fields, and so that's how I got into it. And I met Greg through the Open HMIS forum.
Mm-hmm. That's correct. I went looking for any examples of open source development in the human service informatics field, and I found Eric. All right, Haley.
Well, I feel like I'm a little bit, or a lot like Dale, and then kind of, getting started and then getting my way into the data based on my passions. My background is working in hospitals, trauma centers, and helping them manage their patient injury data. And a lot of people, when they get hurt, they're usually kind of down and out. A lot of times they need a lot of human services in addition to medical care. So watching people around me go through trying to match patients with services and stuff, I want to make that better. And so now I work for the state, working on the emergency medical services information system, but mainly my experience is working with stakeholders and implementing data standards. But I really prefer to analyze requirements, and because I get really excited and I talk fast, and that can be really problematic when you're trying to have a consensus amongst diverse folks. So I'm learning from Greg on that end. So.
Great. And I met Haley Pate at the Code for America Summit. where I was seeking anyone who would have a clear grasp on this particular domain, and someone said, this is the person you need to talk to. And I actually do think she was the one person I needed to talk to in that whole room. So glad to have you here.
Thanks, Greg.
Jason from Single Stop, I see you on. Are you able to unmute and introduce yourself? All right, well, we'll give Jason another moment. I actually just gave Jason an orientation. Single Stop is a vendor. Oh, he's giving me a chat that he's unable to unmute. Oh, that's right. I think he was, that's right. He told me he doesn't have a microphone or a video chat, or maybe he does have a microphone but no video, whatever it is. Jason's, I'll sort of update them for you. Jason is a project manager working at Single Stop USA, which provides a sort of one-stop shop for helping outside of New York City. They are mostly embedded in community colleges. They're an office where people can come in and figure out what kind of benefits and services are available to them. Inside New York City, as I understand it, they actually have all kinds of different sites, which is their home base. And they are redeveloping their system, and and they're considering the prospect of participating in this initiative. So Jason, if you make sure you have the notes document open up, and we can at least have you in there adding any questions that you might have, and chatting with us in there as well. Cool. All right, so I'm going to get to it. We have a number of questions. I'm going to read them all off and see if anybody wants to get in there and revise them as we go. And then I'm going to see. I think we can actually get to all of them. So I'm going to see if I can prioritize them, take facilitator's privilege, and sort of order them as we go. Derek asked about the upcoming workshop, where several of you will actually be there, which is great. And the question is, where do we want to be coming out of the workshop? To better inform what we want to be doing leading up to the workshop. Haley asked about what will be covered during the workshop, whether we have a wish list for topics. Haley also asked a question about interoperability and what does that look like. I think I wrote compatibility here, or somebody did, but is that interoperability, Haley, that you were asking? Okay. What does that look like, essentially?
Sure, both. Well, high level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Dale asked about how we can come up with an evaluation process such that our topics can be empirical rather than ideological, or such that our work can be empirically grounded rather than just ideological. And in fact, Dale's point there does reflect one of the 4 principles that I've laid out in a public document, our public documentation, which is linked at the top of this notes pad. We have 4 values: open, interoperable, reliable, and sustainable. That's like, those are the reasons that this initiative exists, is to make community resource directory data open, interoperable, reliable, and sustainable. And we have a set of principles that I proposed, at least as a starting point. They are subject to review by the working group, many of which members are here. Those principles are: be kind. That's a no-brainer, although it plays out in interesting ways. Open source, which also could mean a lot of different things, but generally speaking, I think we are all clear on the at least some core definition of that. User prerogative, meaning we make decisions based on what's right for the users, not necessarily what's right for institutions or what tracks with existing precedent. And finally, test assumptions, which is essentially this question that Dale's asking about, is how does that actually work? And it's a great question that I actually wanted to put to you all, so I'm thrilled that he asked it. And then Haley asked about the role of the taxonomy, the human services taxonomy, or any taxonomy in this work. Are we adopting other existing taxonomies, or will we be borrowing, researching, and curating our own? I kind of wish Sophia was on the call to really get into that conversation. So I'm actually going to take that question first, just to give you the sort of like official line on it, and you all can sort of like go ahead and either react briefly to it, or maybe if there's time we can loop back to it, having thought about the workshop a little bit and how we'll be formatting that. The brief answer to that question is that the Open Referral Initiative at this phase is just developing a model to describe the attributes of services. Two attributes of services are the type of service, the category of that service, and the type of person being served. Now, in our model, those are simply fields. And they're designed so that you can add your own descriptive item in there. Meaning, if you have a taxonomy of your own, you can use it. If you use the 211 errors taxonomy, that's where those codes go in this model. And if you're using open eligibility, that's where those codes go in this model. Dale and others have pointed out that practically speaking, if we really want to address this problem, there needs to be a method for developing a controlled vocabulary for describing types of services. I tend to agree with that, although not everyone does. And our approach is to simply start from this limited, bounded perspective, in which the taxonomy is like an orthogonal problem to it, and see what we learn by actually developing an interoperability model in which taxonomies can be sort of plugged in depending on the user. And then revisit the topic for future cycles. That's my brief response to that. Any comments? Although I don't, especially since Sophia is not here to discuss the details. Any comments about that or thoughts about how we might set our work up during the workshop and beyond to experiment around this issue so that we can learn about it?
I definitely want to, think about and throw out some ideas. I mean, not in this call, but somewhere like in the forum. But are you guys looking at this being like a breakout session thing, or would you like, or is it going to be more of a general discussion amongst at the event? Because it's a big one. I mean, there's a lot of layers to it.
Yeah. So the taxonomy itself is probably not going to be a primary topic of discussion at the event, although the event will be designed so that if people want to talk about things, they're going to be able to have the space to do so. And I'll also note that at one point it sounded like 211 Los Angeles was going to join us and present on the taxonomy, but even then it would be a brief presentation among other presentations in which we would have opportunity to ask questions about it, but probably would not go into great deliberation.
I'm hearing three different things going on. This is oversimplifying, but on the one hand, we have a standard that we're preparing for the time will allow people to exchange different terms from different vocabularies, depending on the vocabulary of their choice. So that's kind of like the vehicle part. But then also getting into the problem, we've got maintenance of a controlled vocabulary system. And so my question for the group is, do we want to curate our own and because that's a huge process and it's a huge responsibility, or do we want to have the vocabulary part handled outside, or borrow from an existing vocabulary and have the governance and the maintenance of that be owned by a different group that's maybe made a commitment to an open format? Do we know? Are we ready to have that discussion?
So we're certainly not going to have it now, and we could create space for it at the workshop. In this particular phase, at this particular phase, it's an open question, and it may be the kind of thing that we go into that phase deliberately asking ourselves certain questions or positing hypothesis about going in without an answer to that question, so that at the next workshop we can have more focused conversations about it. But for right now, we look at this as a client-side question. We're developing a model. We're developing tools to enable the use of that model. And this is an issue that is orthogonal to that model and dealt with by the people who are implementing that model as they see fit.
Got it. Thank you.
Great. So let me review the questions. We have a couple about the workshop. We have and a couple about evaluation and this sort of thing. So I'll describe the workshop. I'm also going to try to take Dale's question about how we come up with the means of evaluation, and Haley's question about interoperability and what does it look like, and try to merge them. Let's see if we can ask that question together after I describe the workshop in the context of what I've sort of laid out there. And I'm going to turn it back and actually ask it of you all, if that works for everyone. And Haley, are you back to taking notes?
Yeah, I'm trying.
Okay, great. Because I tried to take some when you were talking, but I'm not sure.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, well,
okay. All right. So the workshop, which is coming up in a couple of weeks, and we have about 25 to 30 people who I expect to be there, which is not going to be a full room, which is probably good. So that we'll have some space to breathe. We'll have our work group there. We'll have the Ohana team there. Some facilitators to assist, and we'll have representatives of stakeholders from the ground, primarily in San Francisco, although my organizer will be coming from, not my organizer, our organizer from the District of Columbia will be coming with documentation from the stakeholders there. And it'll be a mix of stakeholders. It'll be some representatives of service providers, at least one representative of a group of users, as well as resource data specialists from 2-on-1s, we hope, and some leadership, some government stakeholders, and possibly some funders or people who work with funders, and some vendors who provide referral system software. And the objective of the workshop is actually pretty modest. It's important that we're having it. I have a lot of high hopes, but we are going to be learning from each other with the purpose of establishing a shared vocabulary. Because as much conversation as we've had, I still, to this day, notice that people are talking about different things with different kinds of words that don't always align. And that's going to be an ongoing challenge. But that's like the first of our challenges, is to establish among ourselves what some core concepts mean to us, and to acknowledge the ambiguity of those core concepts to others, and so that we have the shared understanding of these things mean these things to us, and they may mean these things to others, and that's just the nature of the game, but we'll start there. And we'll do that in the context of the values and the principles that I've laid out. We'll do that in the context of user stories that our stakeholders are bringing, as well as additional possible user stories that participants at the event bring. And we'll also do it then, having done both of those things, we'll also step back from words entirely, or at least partially, and we'll do it visually. We will actually visualize some of these concepts that we're hearing from the user stories and so on. And that's most of day one, which is essentially, to recap, who are we, why are we here, and what do we know? Day two would then be, so what should we do? And meanwhile, a side note, in day one, we'll probably create some space for representatives of the different standards that are in the space, the different formats that are in the space, as well as Sophia of Open Referral, of the Ohana team, to be able to present on their standard, what it is, why it is, what it does, where it's going, that sort of thing. But we're going to be challenging them to present in non-technical language as much as possible. And we're going to be really trying to make that also participatory, something that builds on our shared visual language. And so it may look a little different from how a lot of these kinds of technology conferences tend to go. Our challenge is to develop an understanding that the least technical person in the room will be comfortable with, will understand, will not be intimidated by. And so I am managing the expectations of some of the more technical people in the mix. We will be working together to make sure that if you all want to get geeky, there is time and space somewhere to do so. Just giving you an overview of what our purposes are. For the objective of coming out of the workshop with that minimal viable vocabulary, having been sort of, I mean, we already sort of have one that I've put forth, but that's just really my vocabulary. And this is going to be moving from that towards something that very well may look a little different. We're going to be checking some assumptions through this process and coming back out with like a shared understanding, A, and then some creative, collaborative, beyond brainstorming. It's really visioning for what is it that we want to do with that shared understanding, given these objectives and our vision. And that would be what we come out of day 2 with. For the purpose of developing a report, A, that will like package the content into, and the report will entail probably like a revision of our public documentation according with these concepts. It will include a general roadmap for what we want to do and how we want to get there over the next cycle. And we're also going to be using this as an opportunity to develop a group dynamic among both the stakeholders on the ground, the team, as well as our working group, so that in the future, when in the post-workshop future, as things come up, we have the shared experience to be able to refer to. We have shared vocabulary and so on. Before I jump into thinking through anything in particular, initial thoughts on that. I see that Derek had to jump off. He warned me that he was only going to be able to have a half hour. So right now it's the 5 of us. Haley, Eric, Dale, what are your thoughts, questions?
I did have an idea as you were talking, and it struck me when you said the word vision. I usually think about vision in terms of the future. For me, though, what really helps a lot is to ground in today's reality. So perhaps in the workshop, you could have people, I'll have a workstation set up with a projector and actually go to several different INR websites in different communities, but communities that some audience members are very, very familiar with, and enter in different types of search terms. So like you said, just do a basic search term, enter those, enter in that query, see what kind of results you get. And then go to an INR website that is based on a different taxonomy, enter in the same term, and see what kind of results you come up with. And then use audience members who do have some technical sophistication to explain to the participants why the results are different, or why they or what's their best guess as to why the results are different. Because I've done this on occasion when I don't have anything else to do, and I can kind of figure out why the results are different. And for me, it's always very illuminating when I see that happen. And I think that would help ground the conversation a lot. And it would also make sure that people are on the same page and that you start working with some common metrics. So I know in our prior conversation, you know of a vendor who has an API that's already scraping data. So perhaps go to that site and then also find the INR that covers that same region, go to their site, enter similar terms, and just see what the results are.
Yeah, that's a really helpful suggestion. gonna fold that into. I'm gonna see if there may be a part in our agenda that fits into. And also I hasten to add that the day 2 is much more of an open space kind of thing. We'll be sort of taking a structured approach to getting there, but there will be the opportunity for people to be like, I want to talk about this, and to sense the energy in the room. And so anything that we're not able to fit into the agenda on one end, if people have the idea, they're able to promote that idea on the other end. But this is really helpful, so thank you for that.
I really like that idea a lot. I think that'd be a very valuable activity for us.
Mm-hmm. I especially like it in the context of we might be able to, I wonder if we could see the internal workings. Like if we could see that along, like these public-facing sites alongside the example of what it looks like for a service provider who's not using a website but is using their own sort of data system. Either a case management system or whatever it may be, right? Because we're not just talking about, it's not our jobs to fix 2-on-1's websites or to tell vendors how to build their websites, right? The question of results, of what information gets displayed based on what search text is really relevant to us, and if we can have that, the comparative view that looks at public-facing websites as well as internal sites and internal tools, I think that'd be a really good range.
So was that the intent, Dale? I've assumed that we were talking about the public-facing site.
Well, actually, both. But to get back to a point you made, Greg, in terms of not wanting to fix, somebody's site, my perspective though is that whatever site is out there is somebody's solution. Ideal solution to how they perceive what the problem is. So they may think it's perfect. Everybody's baby, their own baby, is beautiful, and you don't want to say, well, gosh, no, it's not. And it's not to fix their website; it's to understand their thinking that got their website looking the way it did, and then tracking back from that thinking to how their what their model was, what technology they were using, what software they were using, and kind of reverse engineering how they ended up with that, and it may be a very pretty baby, and if it is, let's reverse engineer that. Right. But if it's not, don't reverse engineer that, right, and by accident end up with a baby that's not quite that pretty.
Right.
Can I add a little something real
Yeah.
quick? What if, what I really like about the idea of going to the public-facing website and doing the activity at one and then going to a different website and doing the search and looking at the terms at another website and engaging the audience, because that's keeping it up at the level, it's more of a common denominator, I think, for like everyone in the room, because it's just about words and showing differences between two systems. It's very high level. What if we did that activity and then repeated it again with more of the, okay, now let's look at like what a staffer would see, because that's introducing a few more technical perspectives that is probably a little bit more than what like the lowest tech denominator in the room is going to, they'll be able to get it, I think, if we did it as a second event rather than us doing it all in one thing. Does that make sense?
I think so, and this is helpful. And I'm gonna bring it back to the workshop planning crew and see how we can fit this sort of thing in. We may have the opportunity to fold it into an existing component of the agenda, or we may make it a satellite activity, or we'll create something new. We'll take a look. Hi, Jason. I see you have just joined us. Hello.
Hi. Yeah, I just had to download everything on my phone in order to jump off the computer. So, alternate route.
Well, we're discussing the workshop, and most of the folks here are going to be there. But before I sort of jump on to my next pair of questions, do you have anything else to toss in that you'd like us to discuss?
No, I'm really just I'm serving as fly on the wall at the moment,
great.
but I'll speak up as it comes to me.
Great. Just a moment. Haley, you also asked what will be covered during the workshop. I sort of did a high-level view. You asked about whether if we have a wish list of items for a breakout session, how do we put that out for consideration? Day 2 is going to be much less structured than day 1. Day 1 will be a sort of curated path through our shared perspectives. And on day 2, we're going to go through the process of saying, okay, what's on everybody's minds, and then a process of sorting that into different topics, and then weighting it according to what people say they want to talk about. And then we'll have some means of them breaking off into groups so that if people want to dive into something in particular, they're able to do so. And we'll try to make sure that we have facilitators and scribes in every group.
Cool.
So I want to bore in, and let's actually take this for the next 15 minutes, or let's go 10 minutes on this, and talk about the other questions that Haley and Dale put out. We'll consider one in light of the other. Haley asked, do we know what interoperability looks like? And with the suggestion that we can develop processes for articulating hypotheses, I think, and criteria for evaluation of those hypotheses, so that as we go, we can check whether we are successful along the way, whether we're working towards our goal. And this is similar to Dale's question about how we can ensure that this process is empirical rather than ideological, or even worse, like conceptual or hypothetical. And so I guess I would put this question back to you all, what do you think might be effective in terms of using this time? Basically, we're going to be hearing from all these different participants, like, what do these words mean to you? What's your story of the world? And then when it comes to, okay, what should we do? We'll have gone through the process of saying, this is what interoperability means to us, right? Individually. And these are the things that clearly we share in terms of what interoperability means to everyone, right? Because there's some ambiguity there, and then there's going to be some things that we all agree, right? And so I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the process of forming hypotheses that can then be tested over the course of development and so on. How do we test the assumptions that we will have at least identified that we have through the course of the workshop?
I think there's kind of two main levels to this. I think there's the conceptual. Does the model we create acknowledge or account for shared meaning? How do I put this? I'm going to skip it. The technical part that I'm thinking of is the patterns and the validations. So actually the words and the numbers and the things like that, are those patterns that are acceptable in one system, are they acceptable in our system? Does it go both ways? Is the business logic that we're using, the rules or the constraints that we put on the business logic in our model, is that going to jive with what the business logic is in other systems? And so there's this technical way to go and account for that, but then there's also the philosophy of it too. Does this stuff mean the same thing when we send it from point A to point B?
Okay. I was taking notes.
I'll go back and. I'm curious to know, other folks on the call, how do you guys validate whether one data standard is compliant or interoperable with another. Oh, well, I can tell how I've done it in the past. First thing I do is I look at, all right, what do these guys collect? What's their minimum set of things that they want to collect? And then if I want to actually participate and share data with them in their language, what do I have to have in my file? So I get that list. And then I go to my stuff that I collect with my standard. If my minimum file doesn't collect enough stuff to fill in the blanks for all of their minimums, then right off the bat I got a problem, right? Because my data standard isn't acceptable to them because it doesn't meet minimum requirements for just having a certain number of things described. That's one level. Once you get your minimum stuff and they say, okay, yeah, I can send a file and it has a minimum number of things in it. Do the words I'm using, like, are they going to like my words? Do they expect to see numbers in places where I've collected letters? That's another level. That's kind of how I roll with it. And then when I don't know what things mean, like cricothyroidotomy, I ask my boss. Just kind of how I do it.
And it seems like your question, this question of interoperability, is a two-way question, right? It's, can someone's system be mapped onto this model? Would it even make sense for their system to do so if this model has fewer things in it than they have? And vice versa, can this model actually be ingested by that, be used by that system? Does the language make sense? Is there enough information?
The reason I bring it up is because it's noted at the beginning of the specification that Sophia drafted. So let me open this up. At the very top, there's a statement, and I really liked it because I think that it's a great thing. It says, this exchange format is meant to complement, not replace existing storage formats currently in use. So as a data standards person, I know that if I'm going to complement, if I want my data to complement what a standard someone else is using, I need to make sure that my standard meets their minimum requirements. So, and again, there's different layers technically in the technical world. There's different layers. There's and we all have different terms for them in the technical world, whether we're data junkies or we're programmers. So that's kind of another thing in and of itself. But I think it would be good to have some level of conversation at the conference about what validation, first of all, what level of interoperability, or what is complementing someone's existing format look like, and how specific can we nail that down at this meeting? Once we get that, we can actually go about, I think, listing out the methods of validating.
So I want to turn that question back to Eric and Dale with two caveats. One, during their meeting, there's going to be a window of time in which you could actually have such a conversation if you so choose. It's going to be pretty bounded, probably no more than a few hours during the workshop itself. However, we also may have the chance, I think it would also be fair to say, coming out of the workshop itself, we get our criteria, right, and our definitions of what this means to us, and it's the work group's responsibility after the workshop or around this to actually go in and articulate what they think this would actually mean in the context of the model itself. And so yeah, I'm curious to hear from Eric and Dale. What would you all want to have? What are the tools that you all would want to have in hand? What are the tactics in terms of discussion as well as testing and implementation that come to mind as Haley's describing this particular dimension of the problem?
Gail, you want to take it first, or should I?
Please do, Eric.
Nobody, hot
Well,
potato.
I have a very brief response, which is these are ontologies, what we're talking about here, and they have verbs, predicates, subject, predicate, verb, and verb's part of the predicate. Anyway, you can just map these out and see how compatible they are. You can see if one's a subset of the other, if the lines are if they're equivalents, subsets, subclasses, how that all lines up. Once you do that, it becomes clear either if it's compatible but the subset, if it's just different and different meanings and different relations, or if the definitions are constrained such that some of the relations hold and some of them don't. You can just overlay it and really see how they line up in an almost mathematical sense. I want to say it's graph and set theory, but I don't think it's as what's the word? I think the meanings can be very wishy-washy and have personal meanings, but the exercise of comparing two defined sets can be pretty straightforward.
Okay. So, go ahead, Dale. Yeah.
I'll say ditto, and that's about it. I mean, yeah, Eric just hit the nail on the head. And I know just enough about graph set theory to get myself in trouble, but it really does boil down to the type of logic that is used and making. And I think a key point of what Eric said is you can have the placeholders, and that the placeholders need to be compatible, but how the placeholders get implemented in each local community can be a little different because we're dealing with users who are going to be in local communities. It would be, I don't think we're talking about developing a national or international call center. We're talking about developing local call centers. So if a local community has a way of understanding food pantry, and food pantry is an element in a system, ideally food pantry would also be an element in a different system. How it ends up being used might be different, but the way you would know that though would be through different combinations of eligibility criteria, coverage areas, population served. All those things are going to be locally driven, and I don't think we need to worry about that. That's what local communities do. But again, deferring back to Eric, as long as there is logic and consistency, then you've ensured that interoperability.
Haley, I want to, before you jump in, I want to just put a little bit of a package around this, which is to say, I am looking to you all, like you as in especially Haley and Eric, who are on the workshop, and Derek, work group, who is not here but is as well, and Neil from iCarol, but Dale as well. I think you can be a key advisor in this process, and hopefully future on the workshop, on the work group. I'm going to be looking to you all to figure out how you're going to manage this process. I do not have the answers to that, and we may have opinions or advice or something, but I'm glad that Eric seems to think this is a relatively straightforward process, and so all I can ask is what you would hope for from me in terms of time, space, inputs, whatever it may be, so that I can set you up to be able to figure this out and do it. With the final layer that what you do is then going to be tested by people who are actually trying to make it work on the ground, and they're going to turn around and tell us this is what worked and this is what didn't.
I'd like to know, and if someone could direct me to in the forum where this is, if I missed it, do we have consensus on what existing storage formats we're looking to complement? So are we looking at data exchange standards? Are we looking at specific the data models from software vendors like iCarol or some of the other big players?
So the I originally identified 3, and since then, at least for this phase, it's pretty clear that we're focusing on 2. If I understand your question correctly, the primary ones are the AIRS XSD,
Okay.
which is the standard that's in use by 211 systems and other certified INR systems.
Okay.
And the Civic Services Schema, that's schema proposed by schema.org to the W3C. And those are very different languages used for very different purposes, but they seem on a high level potentially interoperable, and the work that we do could establish that interoperability. We also identified the National Information Exchange Model as another body of data types and we'll have a representative from NEAM in the room with us to talk about it. That said, my understanding of that process is that we should be, and this may be a little unorthodox, but my understanding is we're going to do this and learn from it with the objective of having learned from it through at least 1 or 2 cycles. We can then have that conversation of how should this be built into the National Information Exchange Model, as well as conversations about what other standards are important to align with. Does that make sense?
It does. And what I've found in my own work is really putting all those specifications out on the table and collating them and looking at them and analyzing the heck out of them. We really got to look at all that stuff side by side and see, okay, if we want to be compatible with this, this, and this, what are our options? And having it reconciled and mapped. I'm sure maybe I have to learn more. I'm not familiar with the term graph set theory, which probably scares a lot of you guys, but I'm wondering if there's tools that are used by folks who use that theory that do some of this. So we got to have, I really would like to see an accounting, a reconcile, something in writing that shows for organization identifier, these are the parameters from this system, this system, this system, and this system, and here's how Open Referral is accounting for each one.
So we're almost at noon. Since we have y'all here, if you want to go longer, I'm certainly not inclined to cut off the conversation. But we should. I'm going to try to at least wrap it up before then opening it up to that possibility of continuing by saying that the way I'm laying this framework out is that I'm here to help troubleshoot as you all figure this out. You all meaning specifically Haley, Eric, Derek, Neil from iCarol, and Sophia. And Sophia is also in that role, somewhat different in that, like, in this process, somebody's going to need to be able to make a decision in the eventuality where there's different perspectives. And so I'm looking to you all for both the tools and the mapping tactics that you use and this really is the core issue that you all have to address, right? The sustainability value is more on the local level. You all will have to talk about sustainability of this process in the work group, but this is the core technical issue that the work group is going to be addressing. And I'm looking to you all. I just want to make that clear. I've done a lot of work in scoping this whole process out and convening and bringing people to the table, but this is where your work comes in. And so, in as much as I have a role in that, and others have a role in it, it's you're saying what you all need, and we're trying to go get it for you. All right, final reactions, and also indicate if there's something else that you want to talk about before, in case you want to hang around and keep chatting after afternoon. We're going to go in the line. Dale, you start us off.
I'm fine. I just I posted a link to OWL. It's an ontology tool, and it has a graph visualization that's really helpful. So, I mean, empirically, could we get the other, or could we have all the players, like Purple Binder, Aunt Bertha, Airs, upload their schemas, and then we just simply use OWL as a tool to compare the schemas? That's a tall order, Greg. I see you're groaning and moaning, but I mean that is one way to do it. So.
Well, I guess the question is, what's the minimally viable way to do that, right? Is if we have the Air schema and schema.org and we load them in and start from there. Does that plus our first draft of the Open Referral model? Does that get you all what you need to start the conversation at this phase in time?
I think that looks like a wonderful tool. It looks like a very technical tool, and I know I would benefit from a little bit of a higher level comparison. I'm really glad to know this exists, because once we see that at a high conceptual level we're all compatible and on the same page, then we can make this thing hash out all our attributes and our who's-y what's-its and just make it cook our breakfast. That looks really good. So that will come in handy, no doubt.
Okay.
I'll draft up a little something, and I'll do it for my own self-study, because it's an exercise that I do personally to help me learn the stuff. Mm-hmm. And I'll share that, and maybe we can look at that as a group if folks are interested.
Also, so you know that what I'm thinking is on Friday morning after the workshop, where hopefully we'll have Sophia in the room, although I may have to help get her to change a flight. But we'll have Eric and Derek in the room, and hopefully Haley in the room, and we might be able to. And I'm not sure if iCarol what the deal is. We might just have to work with like iCarol's tech guy, but that will be potentially an implementation moment, right? Where you all could take what's coming out of the workshop in terms of the high-level criteria, the basic fundamental language of what it is that we're trying to do and why, and you all get together in a room and actually say, okay, what does this mean in technical terms? And Dale, maybe we could even dial you in for Friday the 11th, sometime in the morning.
That'd be fine.
So having you on the horn at least, potentially. I don't want to set. This is where I get the least familiar, and so I don't want to set up a train wreck or anything. But so I'm open to suggestions on format of that conversation, or I'm also open for you all to just say, hey, we got this. All right?
Who's in charge? Sophia's in charge, right?
Yeah, although I put a boundary on the nature of that in charge.
I just mean, who do I, if I have a question, who's on the spot to answer me?
It depends on what the question is. So if you have a question, you put it to the work group, Google group, and we will sift it out. But I can imagine questions that are for me, and questions that are Sophia, and questions that are open ones that we're going to have to figure out together.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay. Polycentric, leaderful governance, if that makes sense. To be jargony for a moment about organizing. Okay, final thoughts? Anything else? I'm curious about the format of this conversation. You know, we've done these occasionally. I've canceled a couple when there wasn't anything, really pressing that people seem to want to talk about, and I didn't want to take people's time. But I'm always thinking about how to make it more valuable. Does this feel like a thing worth doing, these assemblies? And if you have any suggestions that you percolate on for how to improve the format, I'd welcome it.
Thanks, Greg. I think it's helpful for me. I've been checked out for a little while, so hopefully I didn't ask too many questions of things that everyone's already known all about, not just me.
Great.
So apologize for that.
Don't apologize, Haley.
Okay. I'm not sorry then.
Great. All right. Any other thought? Jason, what did you think about this first conversation you heard?
Admittedly, it was, fair amount of it was over my head, but it was a great first dose. It's along the lines that I've been reading at the fringes of this conversation. So I think I can try to find the people I'm working with that belong in the murkier depths with who can play with you guys.
Great. Great.
That's really good feedback to have, Jason. I want to get like a coach because it is such a challenge, but a really great skill to have for us to be able to talk about some of these technical concepts, because if I can't articulate what I'm thinking in a way that folks like you who have the expertise can, give me your feedback, then I'm not going to be able to contribute much. So it really helps me to know when I'm taking it up like this, so that I can think differently about my words. Because what is it if you don't simplicity about the relationship between simplicity and knowing what you're talking about?
Well, yeah, this wasn't exceptionally technical, and I think probably 2 or 3 conversations in, I'd probably be more comfortable skating, or sort of surfing on what was being discussed. I can generally understand what's going on after 3, 4 questions of the folks who are really in the nitty gritty. So no, you didn't delve so deeply that there was no connection that possible. I was just trying to catch up. That's all.
I'll consider that a little progress, and I'll take it. It's a compliment. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Haley, it would be great for you to report out specifically to the work group from your thoughts in this conversation.
You mean in writing on the forum?
Yeah, just to the work group itself. And I don't want to give you all that much homework or anything that you weren't already thinking of, but it would be great for you to sort of come back to that context and say, based on what we talked about here, this is on my list of things that I'm thinking about. So.
Okay, I'll do that before I go back to my cubicle, because I've taken a little bit extra time on my lunch break.
Oh yeah, no worries about whenever you have a chance. I don't want to burden you or anything, but
no, it's all good. I'm glad to do it. Very glad to do it.
Great. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
Oh, Dale, any
Thanks,
final
Greg.
thoughts? Dale, any final thoughts?
I'm good.
All right, you're great. Thank y'all.
All right, thanks.
All right, bye.
Bye-bye.